theyeshiva.net.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Rabbi Oliver. Thank you to all of the organizations, the synagogues, the community centers, the JCC here, and all of you gracing us here this evening for such an important, profound, and vital event of hope, of light, of unity, of camaraderie, a night when we remember, when we reflect, when we grieve for an unspeakable crime and senseless act of hatred and bloodshed, and unite in resolve to create a world far brighter and more luminescent. One of the secret weapons of the Jewish people for millennia has been humor. This is not a coincidence. The name of the first Jewish boy, the first person to be born a Jew, you know what his name was? Yitzchak, Isaac. And you know what Yitzchak means? Laughter. Why did Abraham and Sarah decide to name the first Jewish child ever born laughter or a joke? I wonder what a therapist would have thought when the first Jewish boy would come in and say, my parents named me a joke. That's a great boost for self-confidence and self-esteem. But I think that there was a tremendous message in that. In a subconscious way, or maybe in a conscious way. The first Jewish parents were bequeathing a message to their child. Remember, Isaac, Yitzchak, would be the one maybe we speak without a mic. That work? I could speak loud. Yes. Remember that Yitzchak, Isaac, was the first Jewish child. He was born after everybody gave up. Sarah, his mother, suffered from infertility. He was not supposed to be born. The first Jewish parents were supposed to die childless. But then they had their first child, Isaac, almost signifying that Jewish continuity should never be taken for granted. Already with the first generation, it was not simple. And then when they finally had a child, he came close to perish once again on the altar known as the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, recorded in the book of Genesis, in the portion of Vayera, the very portion that was read in synagogues the world over, including in Pittsburgh. On that Saturday, Shabbat morning, 9:45 a.m., when 11 of our precious holy brothers and sisters were gunned down, the Torah reading for that week was Vayera, where you have the story of the birth of the first Jewish child and his coming so close to death, almost encapsulating what would become the history of his people. Their continuity could never be taken for granted, should never be taken for granted, and the world will be fast to eulogize them. I don't know if you know, but the most ancient archaeological evidence for the existence of the Jewish people outside of the Torah, outside of the Bible, is found in Egypt. A tablet. And you know what the tablet reads? The seed of Israel is no more. In other words, the first mention of the Jewish people in archaeological evidence is an obituary for the Jewish people. But here's the good news. We're here to tell the story. Or as Mark Twain said, the news about my death is premature. The obituary of the Egyptian empire for the Jewish people is premature. Because if I ask you tonight, where is the Egyptian empire? Where is ancient Babylonia, Persia, Assyria, the Greek and Roman empires determined to destroy Jerusalem, Judea, Israel, the Jewish people, to decimate it? Where is Vespasian, Caligula, Titus, and Adrian? Where's Turcomedes? Where's Khmelnytsky? Where's Stalin? Where's Goebbels, Himmler, Eichmann, and Rosenberg? And the answer is in Wikipedia. They're all there. We are the Jewish people. And the answer is we created Wikipedia. Together with Google and Facebook and Instagram. And if you want, as I'm talking, I don't mind. You can take out your phone and you can edit Pharaoh and Haman and Antiochus and Nebuchadnezzar and all of the great prophets who wrote the obituary of the Jewish people prematurely. But it's not only that the obituary was wrong. Abraham was bequeathing a message. My dear son Isaac, never forget to laugh. Never forget to celebrate life. I don't only want you to survive and kvetch. Everybody knows what kvetch is? If not, you can ask your grandmother. I don't want you to survive and kvetch. I want you to thrive and laugh. Yitzchak. And we took it seriously. We took laughter seriously. And that's why probably one of the greatest common denominators of the Jewish people is we like jokes. I have the privilege of speaking, I think, to every conceivable type of Jewish audience. From what some would call fundamentalist, ultra Hasidic, ultra Orthodox right wing, all the way to the other extreme, and there's one common denominator. They love jokes. They don't agree about anything else. But they like to laugh, especially if it's jokes about mothers-in-law, doctors, lawyers, food, rabbis. I once heard from Jackie Mason, the great Kabbalist from New York, who said that if two Jews meet and within 3 minutes they don't establish a family connection, one of them is not Jewish. But there's an interesting thing about Jews, and that is when we greet another Jew, I say to you, Shalom Aleichem, and the response is, Aleichem Shalom. Peace unto you peace. Shalom. Which is very strange. Why shouldn't the response be reciprocal? Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. Imagine in English, good evening, and you say evening good. How are you? You are how? What's up? Up what's? It's outlandish, strange. And yet in Hebrew we do it all the time. Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom. And one of the explanations is because when two Jews meet, even before they begin a conversation, they first have to establish that they disagree with each other. Shalom Aleichem? No, you got it wrong. Aleichem Shalom. Once we have established that we have differences, now we can have a conversation, hopefully a peaceful one. So Abraham, almost embedded in the DNA of the first child to be born as a Jew, the permission, the privilege, the need, the obligation, and the duty to be able to laugh and celebrate life, celebrate love, celebrate family. As a people, it explains something phenomenal. The Jewish people have suffered so much, and yet we never developed a culture that glorifies death, that glorifies vengeance, that believes in wallowing in anger. A day after the Jews were liberated from Auschwitz, they could have remained in the mounds of ashes psychologically and emotionally. But one day later, they went to rebuild their ancient homeland. And they went to rebuild families and communities. And almost everyone sitting here is a product of that miraculous commitment to life, to joy, and to laughter. Which is why you'll see this fascinating thing. We don't only survive Haman. We take Haman and we turn him into one of the most favored Jewish healthy foods called a hamantash. And then we take Antiochus and we turn him into one of the most nutritious Jewish foods called a Chanukah latke and donut. In fact, last Chanukah, a Gentile professor asked me, Rabbi Jacobson, why do you Jews eat so many latkes and donuts on Chanukah? What's the meaning of this? And I really didn't have patience to get involved with the oil and the 8 days and the menorah and all. I just didn't have patience. I needed a simple answer. I said, it's very simple. Chanukah celebrates the victory of the Jewish people over the Greeks. The Greeks were into 4 things: looks, fashion, sports, athleticism. So on Chanukah we eat abundant latkes and donuts to make sure that we will never ever look like them. Unfortunately, sometimes I am a living example of my teaching. But this Chanukah, I'm going to try very hard to heed the advice of my wife, who keeps on telling me that latkes and donuts belong to the legacy of Antiochus and should stay out of my digestive system. We take Pharaoh and we turn him into a matzah ball. We don't only want to survive our enemies. We want them to contribute to our cholesterol. We want them to contribute to our fat reserve. We want them to make Jews bigger, stronger, fatter, healthier, and more delicious. For the for the nutritious experts here, I'm just joking. Abraham thus named his son Yitzchak, laughter, telling the Jewish people, never ever allow bloodshed, violence, and hatred to define you, to set the agenda. Never allow anti-Semites to define your destiny and your future. Protect yourself, fight them, do whatever you have to do without apologetics to protect innocent men, women, and children here in the United States and Israel and the world over, together with all innocent and good people. But never allow hatred to substitute your vision, your passion, and your love for joy, for Yitzchak, for laughter. That's where the Jewish sense of humor, I believe, comes from. So tonight, in many ways, is a somber event. It's a Shloshim. We're commemorating the 30-day period since the senseless murder of 11 innocent holy Jews in the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. But it's a night of memory and it's a night of commitment. And I want to tell you something. Pittsburgh produces some of the best, most beautiful, and brightest Jews in the whole world. You know how I know? My wife is from Pittsburgh. I went all the way to Pittsburgh. Now, New York Jews are wonderful. Sometimes a little uptight, but wonderful. Somebody told me the other day, lives in Manhattan, he told me his serenity prayer is, God, give me patience and give it to me now. It's another guy who he was driving 50 miles per hour in Manhattan, and he got a ticket for double parking. So yes, Pittsburgh is a little bit slower, a little calmer. It has even the feel, Squirrel Hill has the feel of a little shtetl. It's not a shtetl. I mean, it's a fine American Jewish community, but it has something fine about it. Very nice place to educate children. I have cousins who are bar mitzvah and bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah in the Tree of Life. A few years ago, I was there at the bar mitzvah of her first cousin, my wife's first cousin in Pittsburgh. I spent many summers in Squirrel Hill, right near the Tree of Life where the massacre happened. I know a lot of the people, I know some of the members. I know the synagogue well and the community intimately. And the way it shattered and shook up the Jewish community, but by nature, as time passes, people move on. Not because we're careless or apathetic or cruel. It's the nature of life. Well, you know that. Tragedies happen, travesties happen, and people go back to deal with their own business and day-to-day stress and pressure. And nobody's missing in today's day and age a little stress and a little pressure, or a lot of it. But we must internalize and remember and reflect on timeless, eternal lessons, besides the obvious that has been mentioned and must be mentioned again and again, that we must not bury our heads in the sand. Yes, it's been mentioned in numerous news outlets that this has been the worst massacre targeting particularly Jews in the history of the United States of America. On one hand, it makes us once again appreciate America. We, the Jewish people who have been through so much and have been expelled from almost every country we lived in, owe a debt of gratitude to a country that welcomed the Jewish people and so many other minorities and allowed us to blossom and flourish in freedom and liberty. And yet, that gives little comfort for the fact that on these blessed shores, where we often feel so safe and at home, this occurred. This could occur. As you just mentioned a few moments ago, it's hard for us to understand. Why do people hate Jews? What have we done? What was the crime of 11 Jews coming to synagogue Saturday morning to pray? What was the crime of a 97-year-old survivor to be gunned down? Siblings, spouses, and innocent worshipers. How and why would a human being dedicate their time and energy and find nothing better to do with their life but to enter into a shul, into a tree of life, and gun down people, any people? It's so hard for us to fathom, so hard for us to believe. It's so alien to everything we receive the moment we open our eyes and nurse our mother's milk. One of the most popular Jewish prayers of Oseh Shalom B'mromav. Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. And let's face it, sometimes in our innocence and naivete, we project it on other people as well, and we do not realize that our world could sometimes be a dangerous place. It's not a reason to stop laughing, it's a reason to have more resolve and more joy and more determination. But it must always allow us to be clear, to be decisive, never to be apologetic, not to be meek. The philosophy of certain people who believe that meekness, weakness, apologetics will appease anti-Semites has been proven over and over again as false. Or to quote Churchill, appeasement is feeding the crocodile in the hope that he will eat you last. Terrorism, the venom of anti-Semitism, is a cancer. One does not come to the doctor because they have a tumor and the doctor says, well, we'll negotiate with the tumor. And I told the tumor, remain only in the stomach. If you remain in the stomach, we're good. If you don't destroy it, it will destroy you. Terrorism, venomous hatred with an intention to kill, wants to destroy, and it wants to destroy innocent people. It was Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the commander-in-chief of Gulf War I, who was asked, I saw in an interview at the time, I was a yeshiva student, and I think it was CBS or NBC interviewed him, and they said, Mr. General Schwarzkopf, what is your opinion? Should we forgive terrorists? And he said, it's not our job to forgive terrorists, it's God's job. Our job is to arrange the meeting. The Talmud put it very succinctly when it said 1800 years ago, Habala hargach, hashkem laharge, when somebody comes to kill you, kill him first and don't apologize. Because when we are passive and we allow murderers to get away with murder, we become accomplices. The first story about the first Jewish leader, Moses, is he was an Egyptian prince. And he went out. And what did he see? He saw an innocent Hebrew being beaten to death. And what did he do? He looked here, he looked there. He saw there was nobody. And he struck the perpetrator and saved an innocent person. That's the first story about a Jewish leader. The definition of leadership is clarity, moral clarity and decisiveness, and a certain sense of fearlessness. Not because we ever celebrate war. It's because sometimes it's only moral violence that can stop immoral violence. But I think that tonight's memorial, tonight's Shloshim, ought to allow us to reflect and go one step deeper. They tell the anecdote of a Jew who was sitting in Central Park, reading a newspaper, sipping a coffee, and a man who obviously did not like Jews came over to him, gave him a punch in his nose and said, "A punch from Hamas." Poor Jew is bleeding in his nose. 5 minutes later, comes over to him, gives him a kick in his stomach. A kick from Hezbollah. Poor Jew is now feeling the pain in his abdomen. 5 minutes later, the man comes back, gives him a shove in his back, and he says, "A shove from Iran." 5 minutes later, a spank in his face, a smack in his face, a smack from Syria. The poor Jew is now really, really sick and wounded, gets up and leaves. The anti-Semite is pleased, sits down in his seat, takes his newspaper and his coffee, and is visibly happy with the outcome of this attack. The Jew leaves, comes back 25 minutes later with a wrench. Takes the wrench, knocks it over his head, and as the guy is about to recede into unconsciousness, the Jew tells him, "A wrench from Home Depot." Now, I like this story, I like this anecdote, because in difficult situations you have to cherish simplicity. Meaning, complexity is wonderful. Nuance is very important, but I believe that complexity and nuance can sometimes become traps that distract us from appreciating what is our calling at a particular moment in history. When these 11 Jews were gunned down in Pittsburgh, why were they gunned down? For one reason: because they were Jewish. As he was shooting the innocent victims, the murderer was shouting, "All Jews must die." These were not just 11 individuals who lived in Squirrel Hill. That would be horrific enough. These were 11 representatives of every Jew who ever lived, every Jew who will ever live, and every Jew who lives. The 11 people represent the 15, 16 million Jews who live today. Because they weren't killed just as private citizens. That would be horrific enough. But they were killed as our brothers, as our sisters. When the police caught him, he said to them, "All Jews must die." That was my ambition. That was my goal. Which is why in Jewish history, we have a name for such Jews. They're called Kedoshim, Utahorim, the holy ones, the pure ones. That's a unique name. We don't give that name to a person. Even fine, wonderful people who live noble lives, they pass on. We don't give them the word kadosh, saintly, pure. Judaism is very, very meticulous about not exaggerating and over-dramatizing terms. in eulogies on tombstones. We're meticulous about it. We believe that the Kabbalah teaches that heaven holds a soul accountable to what is written on the tombstone or what is said at a eulogy. That's why rabbis know that when they eulogize somebody, they should not be exaggerating. There was a rabbi, he was known for his efficient eulogies, very nice eulogies. And a man called him up, very wealthy Jew, but very stingy. He says, Rabbi, I want to hire you to give my eulogy at my funeral. The rabbi says, it'll be an honor, but it's going to cost you. He says, tell me your price. He says, well, there's 3 packages. There's a super deluxe package, a deluxe package, and a regular package. He says, let's go with the best, super deluxe. Rabbi says, super deluxe package is $9.5 grand. $9,500 for your eulogy? What are you going to do already? He says, first of all, I'm going to extol your virtues to the heavens. Second of all, I'm going to break down crying in the middle of the eulogy. I'm going to talk about you in such glowing terms, people will actually think they miss you. He says, it's too expensive. Give me the deluxe package. What's the deluxe package? The deluxe package is $5,000. Really? What do you get for that? He said, I'm going to talk about you in the most beautiful way. I will paint a picture of your life that everybody will sit there and be blown away by you, but I'm not going to cry. He says, that's ridiculous, too much. How much is the regular package? He says, $500. He says, what do you do for that? He says, then I say the truth. We're very, very meticulous about how we eulogize somebody. And I should tell you, in the code of Jewish law, there's a fascinating law, and that is, don't exaggerate by a eulogy, but exaggerate a little bit. Why? So the code of Jewish law, commentators explain, because every person is a little better than you think they are. A little better. Exaggerate a little bit. It's a very profound perspective. And yet, when it comes to these Jews, no matter who he or she is, we have a name. Kedoshim u'tahirim. The holy ones, the sacred ones, the pure ones, the saintly ones. And there's a reason for it. It's the same name that they share with the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Third Reich from 1939 through 1945, including the 1.5 million children who were gassed, who are called Kedoshim u'tahirim. The sacred and pure ones. Because they didn't just die. Their very death was an embodiment of the millennia-long hatred to the Jewish people. What does this hatred come from? What arouses it? What creates it? Am I supposed to enter into the mind of a psychopath? Am I supposed to enter into the mind of a bloody murderer? And yet, the phenomenon is not new. It's as ancient as the first Jew. Some people often attribute anti-Semitism to some unique phenomenon in every generation. In this country, it's caused by this, and in this country, it's caused by this. But the question is, a hatred that continues for close to 4,000 years in almost every country in the world, including today, in circles that are supposed to represent intelligentsia, in universities, on campuses, intelligent intellectuals spew hatred to the Jewish people. Disagreeing with Israel is not anti-Semitism. Disagreeing with anybody is not anti-Semitism. Israel is a very diversified democracy, and if you ever go into the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament, you will see what a Jewish argument looks like. The arguments at your board meetings, which are ferocious, pale in comparison to what happens on a quiet Wednesday in the Israeli Knesset. So they were on El Al, first class, and the flight attendant comes over, the stewardess comes over to the person and says, would you like lunch? He says, are there options? She says, yes. He says, how many? She says, 2. He says, what are they? She says, yes or no. Debate, arguments, differences of opinions, these are not curses, these are blessings. The entire culture of Talmud is one of debate. And the Talmud famously says in Tractate Eruvin 13, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chai. The school of Shammai, the school of Hillel, are both the words of the living God. But there's a difference between disagreeing stating an opinion, versus demonizing a people, demonizing a state, demonizing a country, demonizing a nation. They could never get it right. And completely turning a blind eye to far worse atrocities, then you know something is wrong. And we should never, never allow such injustice and lies to live in our midst. Like the first leader, when he saw an innocent person being beaten, he stood up. People have to stand up for justice, for life, for innocence, for goodness, verbally and in action and through every type of influence we have. So when one just says, we're scapegoated in every century for this reason and that reason, it seems strange. It's always the same people. What did we do? What was our great sin? That we like Chinese food? Today it's sushi. What is the secret of the Jewish people? What did these 11 Jews represent? What was it? Their fate joined not thousands, millions of Jews throughout the generations who were murdered, cut down, just because Jewish blood was flowing in their sinews. But my friends, this very, very tragedy also tells us something so special. And that is, and I think maybe the best example would be the example of miners' Canaries. I don't know how many of you have experience with mining. But if you know about mining, you know that before miners descend into the mines, they send canaries, canary birds, down first. Why? To be able to smell if there are noxious fumes, to be able to detect the carbon dioxide, to be able to tell the miners if this is safe or dangerous. If the canaries don't come back, they know that the fumes there are dangerous, they should not descend. The miners' canaries tell the miners if this is safe territory or dangerous territory. The Jewish people have been the miners' canaries of history. Wherever there is an empire, a country, a culture of hate, violence, bloodshed, the Jewish people somehow detect it and become targeted first. Stalin didn't only kill Jews, killed 50 million of his own people. Started with a unique hatred to Jews. Hitler didn't only kill Jews, but started with the Jews. When the suicide bombings began in the 90s, it wasn't targeting only Israel. 9/11 wasn't targeting Jews. Mumbai wasn't only targeting the Chabad center. London, Madrid, etc. But it started with Jews in the Holy Land. Throughout all of history, we somehow attract that hatred, that venom first. We are the miners' canaries. And whenever you see a country that despises Jews, I can guarantee you that in a few years, all minorities will be oppressed. People that they don't agree with will be stoned, thrown off roofs. Women and other minorities will be oppressed. It begins with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews, which is why anti-Semitism is not only a Jewish concern. It's the concern of every good person in any society. Because Jews are targeted. It's a representation of something. And what is it a representation of? And here we come to the mystery of anti-Semitism. One of the greatest mysteries. If anti-Semitism would have been a physical disease, I promise you more research money would be invested in that into any other illness, because it's an illness that persists for 4,000 years in almost every country in the world. And the uniqueness of it is, it exists in countries that never even saw Jews. How do you hate somebody when you never even saw them? That's how successful it has been. And we Jews have to be the first ones to understand it. And I want to tell you that in the bad news, there is also good news. And to put it in one way, as one Jewish writer once wrote, people don't like their alarm clocks. Maybe present company is an exception, but I know when my alarm clock goes off in the morning, I really don't like my alarm clock. I have tried many times to destroy it, to kill it, to snooze it, but to no avail. It's always resurrected, and has a second coming and then a third coming and will persist that I wake up. People don't like their alarm clock. The Jewish people, from beginning of time, were chosen to be ambassadors of love, light, and hope. When Abraham came into the world, the common pagan practice was you slaughter your children to gods who love human flesh. When Jacob began teaching monotheism, he revolutionized the landscape of planet Earth. And as the Torah says, God says, I loved Abraham because I know that he's going to teach his children to preserve the path of God and dedicate their life, lasos tzedakah mishpat, to live a life of charity, righteousness, and justice, and they will dedicate themselves to give this over to their children. The Jewish people were chosen as ambassadors to introduce holiness, goodness, sacredness into the world. The entire function of Torah and mitzvahs, the entire function of what we call Yiddishkeit, Judaism. A major part of it is, as we say in the Aleinu, l'sakein olam b'malchut shin daled yud, to repair the world, to reveal the oneness of humanity, that we are organically connected, that we were conceived in a single womb, that we are responsible to each other, that we are children of one God, that God expects of us to be good, to be moral. The function of many of the rituals and traditions of Judaism is to inculcate a consciousness of responsibility, to battle darkness within and darkness without. And somehow in every generation, those people and empires dedicated to destruction felt that the first target is the Jew. Isaiah put it and says, the Lord says, you are my witnesses. And as the Greeks used to say, kill the witness, or the mafia say, kill the witness. Hitler said we must rid the world of the God of the Jews and his life-denying 10 commandments. Or as he put it, I hate the Jews because they invented the conscience. They circumcised humanity physically through circumcision and spiritually through morality. But here is the fascinating thing about Jewish history. You would think then that the hatred to the Jewish people should have been directed to Jews who represent Judaism, who represent the Torah, who represent the morality of the Torah. That's not the case. Antisemitism never discriminated. Hitler killed every Jew with the same glee and passion. Communists, atheists, agnostics, believers. From the great Rebbes, mentors, holy spiritual men and women in Poland, in Galicia, in Lithuania, and Hungary, to Jews who were completely assimilated, unaffiliated, who weren't even happy to identify themselves as Jews. The reason for this, my friends, we have to always remember, and that is that in our core there's no difference between us. Every Jew equally is an ambassador of the divine. Every Jew equally is a fragment of sacredness. Every single Jew is a ray of divinity. And that's why every single Jew, no matter how he or she identifies themselves, no matter even how religious or how secular, what they believe or what they don't believe, what their faith is or what their persuasion is, their backgrounds, walks of life, attract exactly the same passion, whether positive or negative, because a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. It's sad because sometimes when we look at each other, we don't see it that way. Sometimes within our own communities, we become very judgmental. Disagreements are valid. Disagreements are legitimate. I told you, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom. We should not stop disagreeing, or we will stop being Jewish. I heard from Eli Wiesel, the famed Holocaust survivor who died a few years ago. He was a friend of the family, my close friend of my father. They were both journalists. And I once heard from him, he said, we fight. We just fight. We just do that for a living. We call our fighting sophisticated names. We fight with the world. We call it sociology. We fight with God. We call it theology. Then we fight with ourselves. We call it psychology. Disagreements are legitimate. But when it translates into mistrust, into judgmentalism, into a sense of fragmentation, divisiveness, disunity, that's our tragedy. And it's our challenge. And sometimes we have to look at our enemies and see how they view us. Sometimes you become wise through your enemies. That murderer in Pittsburgh didn't walk into the shul and start differentiating. What type of Jew are you? What do you believe in? What don't you believe in? Explain to me. Show me your schedule. There's no difference. This has been true throughout the generations. As the missiles, hundreds of missiles a week earlier, a week later were flying from Gaza into Israel. Those who sent the missiles didn't ask, are you a left-winger Israeli? Are you a right-winger Israeli? Are you a pro-Palestinian state? Are you against Palestinian state? Are you Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, ultra Hasidic Orthodox? Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservadox, Renewal, Bagel and Lax. Spiritual but not religious, religious but not spiritual, physical but not religious. That's my type. Matzo ball soup, bingo soup, Lakshan Kugel soup, Lakshan Kugel Jew, I mean. They don't care. If you're a Jew, you don't belong here. You somehow contaminate my world. Why? Because evil recognizes goodness. And evil is allergic to goodness. And evil wants to obliterate holiness. And Hitler and every Nazi knew that even a 2-year-old baby who has no faith, who is not developed, who is not mature, somehow it made them feel good to get rid of that child, because in every Jewish child you have encapsulated all of the Jewish people, all of Judaism, all of the Torah, all of God, and all of Jewish eternity. When you see a Jew walking down the street, you're allowed to go over and hug that person, even though you don't even know their name, just because you're a Jew. There's a holiness in you. There's a goodness in you. There's an inherent spirituality and sacredness in you. This is what we have to remember. How we treat each other. How we see each other. How we respect each other, even when we disagree with each other. You know, as I look at these candles, I recall a picture in my mind. I saw it last year. It startled me, took my breath away. There was a Hanukkah menorah on a window, 8 candles burning, a classic regular Hanukkah menorah, and in the background, there was a huge swastika. I couldn't understand who in their imagination would put a menorah near a swastika. Like you have nothing better to do? And then I discovered this was a real photo taken on December 31, 1932. It was the 8th night of Hanukkah, Friday evening. The rabbi of a city called Kiel in Germany, Rabbi Baruch Posner, was about to light the last set of Hanukkah candles a few moments before Shabbat. His wife, Rachel, set up the menorah. The rabbi lit all of the 8 candles. Across the street of their home was the headquarters of the Nazi party, with a large flag draped over the building, the swastika. And when Rachel Posner saw the menorah burning and the swastika in the background, for her this was a surreal moment. She decided she has to capture it by photo. She took out her camera. She took a picture. And then she ran to light the Shabbat candles because Friday evening is always a rush in every Jewish home. You light the Hanukkah candles, and before it gets dark, before sunset, the woman lights the Shabbat candles. And she took the picture, went to light the Shabbat candles, and they took in the Shabbos, the last day of Hanukkah, 1932. She developed the picture, and on the back side of the picture, she wrote these words in German, and I will translate. Hanukkah 1932. Judea will die, thus says the flag. Judea will live forever, thus say the lights. A few weeks ago, the president of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, summoned a friend of mine for a private audience. So the chief rabbi of Berlin, someone I grew up with in yeshiva in New York, his name is Rabbi Yehuda Judah Tachtel. As the chief rabbi of Berlin, the president of his country summoned him and asked him the following question. This year marks the 80th anniversary since Kristallnacht, November 1938. How should Germany commemorate it? And the Berlin chief rabbi told the president, he said, my teacher, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, has once said, in the place where we saw the greatest darkness, we must see the greatest light. The president says, I have an idea. This Hanukkah, I want the government of Germany to put up the largest menorah at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, in the very spot where my predecessor Adolf Hitler spewed venom and hatred against your people, in the very spot where those motorcades and parades took place, igniting millions of Hitler youth to a life of violence and hatred. I want the menorah to stand tall and cast light, moral liberty and freedom, and the message of the power of light and love at the Brandenburg Gate. And he said, Rabbi, may I ask you for the privilege to light the first candle? Now, usually the candle is lit by a member of the tribe who makes a blessing, and to teach the president Hebrew and to convert him in a few days would be a little problematic. So my friend Rabbi Tachtel said, no problem, Mr. President. You're not only going to light the first candle, you're going to light the candle that lights all the candles. You're going to light the shamash. And tonight and Sunday night, if you travel to Berlin, go to the Brandenburg Gate, and the cherry picker will lift up the president of Germany and the chief rabbi of Berlin. The president will light the shamash, and the rabbi will take the shamash and light the first candle. And I thought to myself, this is the miracle of Jewish history. 80 years after Kristallnacht, a Hasidic rabbi in Berlin is summoned by the president of Germany, the successor of Hitler, and he says, Rabbi, could I have the privilege of lighting your menorah? If this is not a miracle, what is a miracle? And then I think back to the picture that Rachel Posner took in 1932. Who was right? The flag or the lights? Do you know, a few days after she took the picture, Germany went to elections. Who won the elections? Hitler. January 30, 1933, became Chancellor of Germany, and the light of Judea came this close to extinction. But 86 years later, come with me this Sunday night from Berlin to Haifa. And in Haifa, Israel, there's a Jew named Yehuda Manzabach. He puts up a menorah on the window ledge of his home. And do you know what menorah he puts up there? The menorah that his grandfather, Rabbi Posner, lit in December 32 in Kiel. And when he finishes lighting, in the presence of his children and grandchildren, he takes out the original picture that his grandmother took that Friday before sunset. And he reads to them her note in German. Judea will die, thus the flag says. Judea will live forever. Jude vet leben in Ewigkeit, thus the lights respond. And he asks his grandchildren, who was right? The flag or the lights. Because the power of the Jewish people, we knew, was always one thing, and that is our connection to light. For thousands of years, through thick and thin, the Jewish people remained connected to Hashem, to God, to Torah, to mitzvot. And God promised them, just as I will not be destroyed, you will not be destroyed. Somebody told me on the subway they saw graffiti. God is dead, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. Under it, Nietzsche is dead, God. So the prophet Malachi writes, Ani Hashem lo shanisi v'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chilisem. I have not been obliterated, you will not be obliterated. As long as the Jewish people retained a deep connection to eternity. How? Through their eternal Torah and their eternal mitzvot. Through bequeathing it to their children and grandchildren. The traditions, the mitzvahs, the day-to-day connections to spirituality, to truth, to morality, to awareness, to mindfulness, to cosmic oneness, to faith in our lives. Even though when you compare the lights to the flag, they seemed so weak, so impoverished. The flag was gigantic and splendid. Those parades at the Brandenburg Gate were so impressive. Yekkes at their best in the full majestic splendor of the German people. And yet, these lights, which had to survive ferocious storms, ferocious winds. And you know what happens when you put a candle outside, even in a little wind, a weak wind, it gets extinguished. After thousands of years of ferocious winds, the lights didn't only survive, they continue to cast a beautiful glow on our people. Just in a few nights, Sunday night, approximately 4 million Jewish homes will have Hanukkah menorahs glowing, including, I believe, most of your homes, and maybe tonight, after tonight, all of your homes. And approximately 35 or 40,000 public Hanukkah menorahs the world over, including the large one at Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. This tells you about our response to such a massacre. In addition to all that's said above, our greatest power is our connection, our unity, and our commitment to that which kept us afloat for 4,000 years and allowed us to survive through thick and thin. So that first Jew who was born, Isaac, learned, don't take continuity for granted. And don't take Jewish unity for granted. Not long ago, I was at a conference about anti-Semitism in the South. And a Jew gets up and says, Rabbi Jacobson, what's the difference between Jews and anti-Semites? I said, what do you mean? He says, they both don't like Jews. I'm like, okay, that was a first. I get a lot of questions, but that was a first. I said, I'll tell you the difference. If you're talking about ruthless anti-Semites, I'm not going to answer. But if you're talking about civil anti-Semites, as somebody once said, an anti-Semite is somebody who hates Jews more than necessary. But if somebody doesn't hate Jews more than necessary, as much as necessary, yeah. You bring me such an anti-Semite, I want to talk to him. And I'll ask him, what's your opinion of the Jewish people? And he will tell me, oh, the vermin, bacteria, they're responsible for all the problems. Middle East, their problem. Global warming, Israel's fault. Sudan, Afghanistan, the Congo, Syria, it's all Israel. The Jewish people are horrible. I'll say to him, but I don't understand. Your cardiologist is Dr. Goldberg. Oh, he's different. The best doctor in New York. But your neurologist is Weiss. Oh, brilliant man. But your accountant is Finkelstein. He's an honest Jew. He's an honest Jew. But your barber is Schwartz. Oh, he's a good friend. Been going to him for 55 years, the best conversationalist. But I said, your lawyer is Cohen. Oh, he's the best lawyer in the tri-state area. But what's your opinion of the Jewish people? They're a horrible, horrible people. Cursed nation. What about all these Jews? Oh, some of them are my best friends individually. Now, allow me to meet a Jew, any Jew. My dear brother, sister, what is your opinion of the Jewish people? And the Jew will tell me, I love the Jewish people. They are the best, such a beautiful, such a special, such a holy, such a good nation. Tell me, what's your opinion of your brother-in-law? Oh, lowlife. What about the guy who davens near you in shul? Despicable! What about your neighbor? Don't even get me talking about him because he'll end up in prison. What about the gabbai in shul? I wouldn't trust him with a quarter. What's your opinion of the Jewish people? I love the Jewish people. I said, you see, the anti-Semite hates the Jewish people. But the individual Jew he sometimes likes. We all love the Jewish people. When it comes to the individual person, sometimes we have a hard time. But my friend, the Jewish people are made up of individuals. Yes, we have shlemiels, we have shlemazels, we have nudniks. As my grandmother would say, the shlemiel pours the soup on the shlemazel. The nudnik wants to know what type of soup it was. Yes, we have neurotics, we have psychotics, we have psychiatrists. The neurotic builds castles in the air. The psychotic lives in them. The psychiatrist collects the rent from both of them. And as you know, the rent is extremely steep. But Kalal Yisrael, Am Yisrael, is made up of individuals. These 11 holy Jews who died for one reason represent all of us. The man was targeting every one of us sitting in this room and every Jew the world over. They carry our name. They carry the power, the dignity, the holiness of the Jewish people from time immemorial. Notwithstanding any disagreement Jews may have with each other, the holiness of every Jew is timeless, eternal, embedded. Next time when you look in the mirror, never ever tell yourself again, I'm a bad Jew. I'm an alienated Jew. I'm not the religious type. I'm not like you, Rabbi. I'm not really part of the system. There's no such a thing. Every Jew is essentially connected. Every Jew is infinitely loved by God, and every Jew is infinitely connected to every other Jew in our long story of history. Every single Jew is fully Jewish as Moses, as Jewish as Rashi, as Jewish as the Baal Shem Tov. Never ever cast a doubt on your connection, on your Jewish identity, on your deep Jewish intimate relationship with every other Jew and God, because that is the ultimate truth of our being. And when we don't remember that, sometimes we're reminded that by those who will not discriminate between Jews and will treat us identically, because in some very deep place we are truly one, and we should see each other that way. And at such a moment we should remember that as long as we continue to ignite those lights, the lights of love, light, and hope, as long as we continue to cast the light of Torah in our lives, the power of tradition, the power of mitzvot in our day-to-day life, we know that despite whatever flag or carrier of the flag says, as Rachel Posner understood in her intuition on that bright and dark night, December 31, 1932, Judea will live forever. Jude vet leben in Ewigkeit. Thank you very much.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.